the primetime showing of the latest installment of the January 6th insurrection hearings. So we're going to wait for people to trickle in. I again appreciate all of our panelists for joining us tonight, for the members who are showing up, and for those of you who are still trickling in, this will be posted to our social media and to our YouTube page. So I'm going to just give it a few more minutes, because again, I think that there might be a slightly larger draw, even though the discussion that we're about to have is incredibly important. There's so many important things happening in the world today that it's kind of hard to keep them all on your schedule. Oh, good. I see that we have Senator Stahl Hamilton joining us. Fantastic. And we've got some more audience members. I'm going to go ahead and make sure that my Facebook is open so that I can see if we do have any questions coming in from the audience. Essentially, this is going to just be a quick hour-long discussion about, what is happening post-Roe, post the demise of Roe. I'm not even sure how I'm supposed to say that. And we have some really fantastic panelists. So let me get my screens all in order right now. Should have probably done that before. Thank you for your patience. And all right, there we go. I see the event. All right. So real quick, I am going to share my screen so that we can give just a little bit of background about why we're having this discussion, and and then I'll allow you all to I can introduce you, you can introduce yourselves, but I have your bios, they're pretty brief, and then if I'm able to read them, then maybe we could just go ahead and get right down to brass tacks. So let me share my screen real quick. Here we go. Where is it? There we go. Share. All right. Slideshow. Here we go. So tonight we are talking about reproductive justice and religion. And again, this is Secular AZ. We are Arizona's voice for the separation of church and state, have been for the last 12 years now. And let's just kind of dig right in. Let's talk about Americans and their feelings on abortion access. And I know you can all see the numbers over to the right of your screen. 85% of Americans say that abortion should be legal in all or some cases. 61% say abortion should be legal in all or most cases. And you can see the breakdown here. I'm sure that Lindsay, our development director, can share this information with anybody who is interested. So when we talk about abortion and when it should be legal, in all or most cases, you can read this yourself, but the vast majority are those who feel non-affiliated with a particular religion, or nuns as they're called, not to be confused with NUNS, but these are NONES. 83% of Jewish people, 82% of Buddhists, 60% of non-evangelical Christians, and that non-evangelical part I think is really important. 56% of Catholics, 55%, you can all read the numbers there. And again, this is information that we would happily share with you. Religious traditions and abortions. So this is the breakdown of major religious groups and their positions on abortion. So you can take a look and see what how it's broken down based on different faiths here in the United States. And then this is, I think, probably the most important part, is where is abortion now effectively banned? So prohibited. We are currently in a state where abortion is prohibited. We are relying on, Brnovich's decision that the territorial law banning pretty much all abortions is in place, and we have abortion providers who are afraid, to be quite frank, of losing their licensure. So what's happening right now is that there are almost travel bans happening in the United States of America. Who would have thunk that that would happen in 2022, where folks who need access to abortion health care are no longer able to access that health care. So let's see. So we want to talk a little bit too about reproductive justice. There have been a lot of discussions these days about pro-choice versus reproductive justice. And reproductive justice is an ideology that was developed by the women of African descent for reproductive justice in 1994 as the human right to maintain personal bodily autonomy. These three core values involve the right to have a child, the right to not have a child, the right to parent a child or children in safe and healthy environments. And then, of course, the focus areas here, reproductive health, means that we would address the inequalities in health services by advocating for the provision of services to historically underserved communities. Reproductive rights emphasizes the protection of an individual's legal right to reproductive health services, focusing on increasing access to contraception and keeping abortion legal. And then reproductive justice, which is, I feel, the world that we live in now, or we need to live in now. It encompasses reproductive health and reproductive rights while using an intersectional analysis to emphasize and address the social, political, and economic systemic inequalities that affect reproductive health and the ability to control one's reproductive life. So that's the little bit of background that I wanted to share. Let me go ahead and stop sharing my screen. And let's get right into the amazing, wonderful panel of guests that we have right now. I'm going to just provide everybody with a quick introduction. We'll talk about we have a few questions lined up, and I'm asking you all if you would be able to jump in and answer a question. If you feel the need to do so, you can do it with hands up or use the emojis, whichever you're more comfortable with. So let's go ahead and start off with quick introduction. So everyone, tonight for our discussion, it's about reproductive justice and this recent SCOTUS decision. The discourse surrounding abortion oftentimes frames the anti-choice, anti-abortion movement as religious in nature. Conversely, those who support reproductive justice, abortion, access are often assumed to be secular or non-religious. It's a common narrative, but it actually obfuscates or even erases the existence of a long history of religious tradition and activism that supports the work toward reproductive rights and justice, including access to abortion. In fact, several major religions support abortion rights with few or no limits, including conservative and Reformed Judaism, the Presbyterian Church, the Unitarian Universalist Church, and the United Church of Christ. Others support abortion with some limits, meaning medical necessities, such as Islam, the Episcopal Church, the United Methodist Church, and the Evangelical Lutheran Church. The religious equals anti-abortion narrative also overlooks public opinion polling that shows that 85% of Americans support legal abortion in all or some cases, and 61% of Americans support legal abortion in all or most cases. This majority includes 60% of non-evangelical Christians and 56% of Catholics. For comparison, 84% of religious nuns, N-O-N-E-S, support legal abortion. So in spite of this diversity of beliefs and a majority of Americans who support legal abortion, the recent SCOTUS decision in the Dobbs case has or soon will effectively end safe abortion access in about half of the country. A decision that was based on a singular application of one particular set of religious beliefs. So today, we want to highlight the diversity and range of beliefs that actually exists on this issue. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce our guests. First, we have Deidre Aboud. She is a Phoenix-based attorney and founder of the Global Institute of Solution-Oriented Leadership. Deidre launched and directed the Arizona chapter of the Council on American Islamic Relations and was director of the Arizona chapter of the Muslim Americans Society's Freedom Foundation. We also have tonight Shalise Blythe. Shalise Blythe is an ordained minister with the Satanic Temple, was a member of TST's International Council, and was the national director of After School Satan Club. In 2021, she became the first woman officially ordained as a minister of Satan by TST's Satanic Ministry. Next, we have Bishop Anthony Holt. He is a community activist and board certified alcohol and drug counselor with degrees in psychology, criminal justice, and ministry from Covington Theological Seminary. He sits on the Arizona Attorney General's Advisory Council on opioids addiction. He's a community lead volunteer and board member for the AARP Chapter 1. We also have tonight Rabbi Emily Leibowitz. And Rabbi Emily is the Jewish Engagement and Learning Manager at the Union for Reform and Langowitz. Okay, thank you. I see it happening right now. Langowitz. I'm so sorry. I got it right now. And was the assistant rabbi at Temple Salel. She lives in Phoenix, Arizona with her wife, Megan, and their dog. Oh, with their dog, Frank. We're going to have to find out what kind of dog you have next. Next, we have Shannon Russell, who is the Director of Policy for Catholics for Choice and an advocate for reproductive health, rights, and justice. She's also served as legislative counsel for the National Council of Jewish Women. And then finally, we have Senator Stephanie Stahl-Hamilton. Senator Stahl-Hamilton received her Master of Divinity from Princeton Theological Seminary and is a Presbyterian minister. She serves in the Arizona Senate for the 10th District and previously served as a member of the Arizona House. And I'd like to add that Senator Stahl-Hamilton also received a perfect scorecard from Secular AZ when it came to voting for bills that advocate for the separation of church and state. So welcome to everybody who's here. And I'm really happy to say that we have 10 webinar attendees, and there's a few other here on Facebook. So despite all of the national media noise, people are still really concerned about what is happening in their own backyards. So let's go ahead and kick this off. And again, I want, and again, if you want to add anything that I may have missed in your bio, please add it as you answer these questions. First question we have is, how do you define reproductive justice / rights? Don't all jump up at once.
So good afternoon, everyone. So I am Bishop Holt. I'm also the president of the West Valley NAACP, as well as the state chapter president, vice president of the NAACP. So when we talk about rights, as a civil rights leader, I always look at what is that individual's belief system and how do we honor it? And one thing I think is the government likes to encroach on those rights based on those beliefs, not the individual's beliefs. I think when we talk about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, we're talking about individual rights as God, as the Creator has given them. So what we do as far as a society to try to tell someone else what to do, it encroaches upon the right to think for ourselves, move for ourselves, and govern ourselves. Now, granted, the laws are put in place to keep a civilized society civilized. When we start to encroach upon the rights of individuals, that breaks the civilization into something more of a dictatorship, and that's not rights.
Is there anybody else who wants to tackle that question about how do you define reproductive justice / rights?
The slide looked good to me.
Right? I mean, it's pretty clear cut. So let's go ahead and go to the next question. And I think we may have actually answered this a little bit because it says, what's the difference between reproductive rights and reproductive justice? And I think that Bishop Holt also kind of answered that question for us as well. So this is a good one, because I think this is why our members are showing up tonight. Describe how your faith tradition approaches / supports abortion access.
Okay. I'm going to say it depends. One of the slides that you pulled up said that 55% of Muslims in America support abortion. And in this one, even though people even accuse me of Americanizing Islam, at the same time, this particular survey is definitely Americanized Islam, because Islam is actually, within the Quran, it even talks about the creation of the sperm and egg and them coming together and creating a zygote. And then it talks about when the soul enters the body, which is at 4 months. So Islam has always been very clear about before 4 months that abortion is permissible. And every majority Muslim country in the world, including Afghanistan, Saudi Arabia, and Iran, are more progressive and liberal on abortion than Arizona.
I'm actually kind of really surprised by your answer when you said Afghanistan specifically, especially when we know that, young girls in Afghanistan, their ability to access education is limited. So that to me is really surprising.
Yeah, Afghanistan, Saudi Arabia, and Iran are also more progressive on birth control, contraceptions of all kind, than what the Republican morality police in the United States are trying to pass now.
Have you coined that phrase, Republican morality police? Because I really like it.
All over my Facebook all week.
I don't go on Facebook that much anymore, but I'm going to have to, because I do really enjoy the Deidre Abood, musings, like, your observations of people, and how you actually have people who come up to you all the time and will talk to you very candidly about you wearing your hijab and all that kind of stuff. So that's really interesting to me.
And technically it's faux morality police, the Republican faux morality police.
Much like faux news, right? It's not real news, it's faux news. So anybody else want to go ahead and tackle that one, and speak from your perspective as a faith leader? Okay, Shalise, I see you.
Yeah, sure. So when it comes to reproductive justice, reproduction, and how one views bodily autonomy and Satanism, the right to one's bodily autonomy is part of our fundamental tenets. Specifically, we have 2 tenets with the Satanic Temple. We have 7, but 2 of them kind of talk about these issues very clearly. One being one's body is inviolable, subject to one's own will alone, and also belief should conform to one's best scientific understanding of the world. One should take care never to distort scientific facts to fit one's beliefs. So when it comes to reproductive justice for anybody who has the capability of reproduction, it really is kind of the keystone of what reproductive justice is. It is one's right to bodily autonomy and having ownership of what happens to their body. And when it comes to the laws and the beliefs of others that conflict with when does life begin, we really don't tackle that question, because we feel that this idea of when life begins relating to whether or not abortion is moral or not, we find that is that's a religious point of view, and we take a very scientific point of view, where when it comes to what's best for the person and their will, and what happens to their body, that is a decision that only they can make, with also the help with the medical provider who is providing them care, because abortion is it's a medical procedure. It is a safe, effective medical procedure. And because of that, we do not place a moral question on abortion, because it is simply that. One's ability to make that decision for themselves, to have complete autonomy of their bodies, and to make those decisions that's best for them, no matter what circumstances they're in, and what is going to be best for them. So this covers whether or not somebody pursues an abortion because they no longer want to be pregnant. It covers, whether or not somebody who, has to be put in the terrible situation of having to decide about whether or not to keep a very much wanted pregnancy because of health complications or fetal complications. These are things where whether the pregnancy is wanted or not, when it comes to abortion and reproductive health, reproductive justice, it comes down to, my decision, my autonomy, and what is best for myself based on the inputs of a medical provider, as well as what's best for me as an individual. So that is how Satanism views reproductive justice. Reproductive justice is that one's body is inviolable, subject to their own will alone.
Sorry, I feel like we've seen a lot of it's like this endless parade of horror stories right now, which I think is really unfortunate, because it is such a personal decision, one to be made with your healthcare provider. And while those stories are important of people who really wanted this child, but I feel like they're being kind of paraded about as if that should get us to be able to all accept one's own body autonomy. And I don't think that is necessarily the right thing to do, but it is where we are right now. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Shannon. I see you next. So go ahead, Shannon. Catholics for Choice. Same question.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think that the dominant thing that a lot of people know about Catholics is what the hierarchy says, not what the people who are in the pews are saying. And there's this massive disconnect. As you saw when you showed on the slides, 56% of Catholics believe that abortion should be legal in all or most cases. 68% of Catholics did not want Roe versus Wade to be overturned. And so I think that gets lost a lot. And so at Catholics for Choice, we are actually guided to do this work by our faith and by our Catholic social justice values. And we, strive for reproductive freedom and equal access to comprehensive, affordable, equitable care for all, because it's intrinsic to respecting human dignity and achieving social justice. So we believe that all people are made in the image of the divine, and they deserve quality healthcare services. And it's as simple as that. We're also called as Catholics to center the lives of people who are most marginalized and who are often denied the basic human right to have maintained bodily autonomy, to have or to not have children, or to parent the children that they do have in safe and sustainable communities. So our social justice values demand that we dismantle the sinful structures of systemic racism, gender inequality, economic insecurity, so that people can freely choose for themselves how best to build and care for their families. And finally, I'll say that as Catholics, we really respect the separation of church and state, and we value religious pluralism and diversity. And so we know that there's no liberation without freedom of and from religion. And the role of individual conscience is at the core of Catholic faith. So Catholics value all people as moral agents who are free to make their own personal decisions about their bodies, families, and futures according to their own consciences and without political or religious interference.
So while I was not raised in the Catholic faith, my mom's side of the family, there were the good Irish Catholic, mostly Democrats. And I remember my great aunt Nadine, she was the first one actually to move out to Arizona back in 1971. And she really was very much like a grandmother to me, but I remember having discussions with her because I was always surprised at kind of her, I guess, liberal nature. You know, she was always voting Democrat and she was always supporting a person's ability to access abortion. And I remember when she told me, you know, well, if we're not taking care of the whole person, the whole community, then there's no way that I could take a stand against this. Like, she really understood the idea of really taking care of our most marginalized communities. And though I never, and I'm glad that she never took me to church, I'll be honest, but you know, like, because the mass part, you know, the sitting and the standing and the kneeling, it was a lot. Yeah. But I was really always grateful for her perspective and her ability to kind of understand that while she may disagree with something, until as a society, we are able to provide for our most vulnerable communities, well, then she's going to continue to disagree with that, you know?
Yeah.
All right, let's go to Rabbi Emily Langowitz.
Sure. So I want to lift up part of what Deidre said about, you know, it's hard. I very rarely like to say, well, Judaism says X, because Judaism is a very interpretive tradition. And particularly when you're working with sacred texts that come from thousands of years ago, the questions of the 21st century might not actually be present in those texts in the way we might expect. So for the same reason, we have to figure out, well, what are you supposed to do with a car on Shabbat? You know, Moses was not driving a car around the desert. It's similar in terms of the discussion within Judaism around abortion, that some of the oldest texts we look to aren't talking about the abortion procedures that we know today. But the beginning, the seeds of that discussion are from the book of Exodus. There's a case in Exodus 21 verses 22 to 25 that talks about if two people are fighting in the marketplace and one pushes a pregnant woman, and they talk about two different cases. If in the first case she miscarries, but she lives, then the person who's pushed her is subject to a monetary fine. And by the way, it's a monetary fine that's imposed by her husband. So we already are sort of aware, like, there's just certain realities of what it means to look at a text this ancient. And in the second case, if she both miscarries and then she herself dies, the person who does it is subject to capital punishment. And the Hebrew says nefesh tachat nefesh. And the word in Hebrew for nefesh, people will sometimes translate as soul, but I like the translation sort of full-fledged being. So this is the kind of foundation of Judaism's understanding around abortion. And again, it comes from a text that has nothing to do with abortion, but has to do with other aspects of the reproductive life cycle. And basically from there, we see there is a foundational difference between the category seen as the fetus, that it's not full-fledged beingness yet. And the discussion will go on, and you know, the more stringent positions derive from one place and the more lenient positions derive from another place, but at its core, the Jewish discussion around abortion is sort of based on that idea that there's some kind of status differential between the potentiality of personhood in the womb and the full-fledged personhood of the person actually carrying the pregnancy. So you'll see lots of different opinions across the spectrum of Judaism, some very permissive, some a little more specific. I think all Jews pretty much will agree that abortion should not only be permissible in some cases, but necessary in some cases, in cases of extreme danger to the health of the pregnant person. So that's part of why you see that 83% of American Jews are supportive of abortion being legal in all or most cases, because wherever you are in the spectrum of what Judaism has to say and interpret about these things, there's at least some sense, if not a full sense, of permissibility around making those kinds of choices, again, because the person carrying the pregnancy, I think this is similar to what Shalise was saying, that they're sort of a full-fledged personhood, as opposed to the pregnancy itself.
And I think for me, that's maybe the most kind of shocking thing is that, you know, the denial of the person who's pregnant of their own personhood, you know, it's just, it's astounding to me. I can't imagine being in a position where I would have to look at my loved one and say, sorry, you know, your personhood doesn't matter as much as this, you know, fetus's personhood. So we're just gonna have to let you die because the law says we have to. It's just so barbaric to me. I see Senator Stahl Hamilton has her hand up. So go ahead, same question to you, Senator.
I think not much more to add here. I think Shannon was so eloquent in laying out the tenets of the Catholic Church. I think the Presbyterian Church, a couple of things. They have had a pro-abortion policy since the early 70s. If you go on the National Church's website, it's a policy paper, and it steps you through the history of how they've come to, you know, their position on abortion. And with that, I will say from its inception, the Presbyterian Church has had they play a high emphasis on education. So by and large, you know, there's a lot of critical thinking that goes on with the stances that the church makes. Everything they do is hours and hours of conversation, and study. You know, there's study committee for everything in the Presbyterian Church. But then aside from all of that, I think mostly everything is rooted with a sense of justice, and that justice comes from a theological lens that that our Creator is just and demands justice of us and for us to act justly. And that justice is also through the lens of great love and compassion. So if the motivation is the law of love and compassion, you get to justice a little bit more quickly. And it's not the feel good, you know, it's the love that's hard fought. It's the love that really is courageous and is willing to stand on its own. And so for me, you know, just even looking at the separation of church and state, I think for me, it's an easy stance to take. The church has no business in our state policies. And so these laws that are coming at us from an extreme ideology, I don't even think there's nothing religious about it. And so that's the part that frustrates me. And then I just take that step, you know, back into knowing my roots, you know, and from that space of compassion and love. And then of course the Presbyterians have policy papers for everything. And so, you know, you can trace the history of the thought behind it, but all of this really does come out of this bent of justice.
You mentioned all the committees and how you have to have a committee for everything. For a brief moment, when my children were little, we attended the West Valley Unitarian Universalist Church, you know, because I was a new parent and I was like, I didn't grow up with religion. I got to do something with these kids. And there was committees for absolutely everything. So I bet there's probably a lot of similarities between the two. Bishop Anthony, I see that your hand is up. Go ahead.
So I agree with the senator on the conversation. There is nothing religious in this conversation. So when we look at it from a civil rights or from a rights perspective, and I don't mean to disrespect anybody that's Republican, because I have many family members that are, but these Republicans are making more to do about that is not religious with a smoke screen. It is a cloak of darkness that they are saying that under the guise of religion. There's nothing that they can prove textually, scripturally, canonly, anything that is backing any of the conversations they are. So from a civil rights argument, we look at, there is a dominant group of individuals who want to carry on a tradition that benefits them in a different way, but the guise of religion is used to protect the lives of the unborn. The problem I have with that conversation is that we have children that come into this world who are sick, who are damaged, who are lonely, who have no parents. Those same people that want to save these lives are the same people that walk away from the funding, that don't help these children when they're here. They don't help the parents figure out what to do with these kids. So how can in one voice you say we're protecting life and we're destroying lives at the same time? So that it seems like this is an oxymoron in this conversation of thinking. So when we talk about people that talk about, oh, it's the religion, it's God, it's this, that, I say half of them don't know the scriptures that would even back their argument, because there are none. Because in the canon, I teach religious history. So in the canon, in the Torah, in the Quran, you will not find any of these arguments to back one of these ideas. So where is this conversation coming from? It is coming from an ideology, a personal theology of how we stop freedom or the rights of freedom to go forward, so we can just feel good about we're in charge. And that's my 2 cents. So I thank you guys for letting me put that out there.
I mean, I agree. I think that we're seeing that this pro-life argument is almost never has to do with preserving life. It has to do with preserving power and control over a certain group of individuals. You know, because if they were truly pro-life, well, we would have universal daycare. We would have universal health care. Everybody would have access to an excellent public school. But instead, you know, and you're right too, Bishop Holt, that this is a political ideology that is based in power and control and maintaining that power and control, and really has very little to do with preserving life. When we are taking, you know, millions of dollars every single year out of our public schools, from our most vulnerable communities, and giving them to, and you know, the sponsor of the bill, Ben Toma, said that this is accessible now to multimillionaires, the voucher expansion. So $7,000 does not cover a full private school tuition. That means that we're taking taxpayer dollars from communities that really, really need it and giving it to millionaires. I don't know if any of you have been paying attention to the private prison series that's been going on in the Arizona Republic. The reporting by Jimmy Jenkins and Joseph Joffrey is incredible reporting. If you really cared about an individual's, you know, right to life, well, then you wouldn't be charging them to send emails or use the phone so that they can be in touch with their families. You wouldn't be denying them access to mental health services or to, you know, drug addiction, you know, programming. You would be educating them. You would be elevating them and taking care of them. So I'm so sick and tired of this pro-life argument, because it's pretty clear to me that there are some individuals who are representing us in the state of Arizona who say out of one side of their mouth that they are pro-life, but out of the other side and out of the policies that they craft, it's pretty clear that it's about power and control and lining their pockets. So, all right, let's go ahead. We have about 20 minutes, and I think this will just about cover it. So the next question that I have for all of you is, how does your faith translate into activism / advocacy on this issue, on the issue of reproductive justice? So how does your faith translate into activism / advocacy on this issue? Because I think too, our members would be really interested in hearing what that looks like. And especially if you have opportunities where people in their communities who are feeling really frustrated right now, don't know how they can help. How can they help? And how are you doing the work in your own communities? And I see, Shalise, you have your hand up. Go ahead. Shalise, you're muted.
Sorry, I was putting my hand down to be polite. Forgot the other part. Yeah, so thank you. So when it comes to Satanism, more specifically the Satanic Temple, we have taken the approach when it comes to reproductive justice for Satanists that we understand inherently that, you know, in line with what we've already talked about, this has nothing to do with laws, policies, or institutions that are making these as a point of protecting people's rights, is to take them away. It is to go against all valid medical science and to go against, you know, people's inherent right to their bodily autonomy. And going against those two is actually a violation of our religious beliefs, as I stated for our two previous tenets. And so one of the things that we have done as the Satanic Temple is look at this from the lens of, well, they're taking our right that, you know, we live in a country, specifically in the United States, where religious rights seem to have more weight to it, the way they're written. We have RFRA that is instituted in several states, Arizona being one of them. And because religious freedom seems to be the one thing that these lawmakers find to be the most sacred and valued, we have decided to protect our religious freedom, you know, in line with our tenets. So RFRA entitles people to religious exemptions from even neutral or generically applicable laws. Requires that we have sincerely held beliefs or practice, which you know, cannot be interfered by law. So when it comes to our ability to seek reproductive health care, whether that be mandatory waiting periods, mandatory needing to sit and read literature that is state mandated propaganda, not scientifically valid, whether that is abortion bans entirely. We have made the case that these bans actually go against our religious beliefs. They go against our ability to practice our religion. So we have a few things of which we have done as the Satanic Temple to protect our members' rights to their bodily autonomy, as you know, as is you know, as they should have. And so we have, you know, had lawsuits when it relates to not having to, you know, be subject to mandatory waiting periods, which they institute as a way for us to be handed state-mandated propaganda that is meant to shame and try to dissuade people from getting a medically valid procedure. So we have, you know, we have exemption forms saying this actually violates our beliefs. It violates our ability to, you know, get what we do as in line with our religion. So, you know, we are exempt from this under RFRA laws. And we also have our religious abortion ritual. And I just want to clarify that the religious abortion ritual is not, it's not a satanic ritual that is mandatory to have as a Satanist. The ritual itself has nothing to do with the abortion itself. What it is an affirmation of one's decision in line with the tenets of bodily autonomy and you know, basing one's decisions on the best medical science available. And we have it exempts us, you know, for engaging in this religious ritual, which is done prior to obtaining a procedure, whether that's medically induced or surgically induced. And it's just an affirmation of one's decision to have that care. And so any interference via bans would actually prohibit us from engaging in religious practice. So we have a couple lawsuits, two in Texas now, I do believe, that fights against the 6-week ban or the laws instituted there to prevent us from our religious beliefs. And there are other things that we have done. You know, there is a lawsuit against the FDA to allow us to have access to abortion-inducing medication, again, in line with our ability to be able to take, you know, medication as is our right via our tenets. And you know, so there's a lot of things, not only with, you know, challenging the laws, challenging, all the things that prohibit us from being able to engage in our religion, our religious practices. But we have other things that are coming down the pipeline that aren't necessarily abortion or that aren't exactly like lawsuit related, and more how we are able to give care and be able to provide access to our members. And so you may end up hearing about that in the news within the year. And yeah, so we, when it comes to our activism, the things that we do, we are protecting our religious rights because we understand inherently that those seem to be the only rights that anyone cares to protect. And it's kind of our last stand. All of our other rights are being taken away from us. So, these are sincerely held religious beliefs, and it's not for show. It's not for the sake of being spicy. These are things that are really fundamental to us. And so, we'll see how these lawsuits go. We'll see how the unequal application of the law goes in the courts. So.
Well, and I think that that's one of the most interesting things about your organization too, is that the legal challenges. I think that's a really interesting, effective, sometimes hopefully strategy. And then you touched upon something that I'm hoping that Senator Stahl Hamilton can talk about it a little bit more, because you talked about these, these pregnancy centers, right? And in Arizona, we've given great expansion. So put a pin in that, Senator, because I would love it if maybe you could talk a little bit about what's happened legislatively to give validity to these pregnancy centers where they aren't really medical professionals, but they are an ideologically driven organization that is all about prohibiting bodily autonomy. But I see that we have Deidre Abood, whose hand has been up patiently for a long time. So Deidre, same question.
I thought you were going to repeat the question because you cut out. No, that's fine. So Islam is all about justice that has been previously talked about by others, and then privacy. Privacy is huge within Islam. One of the backlashes that we get is people assume that Muslims are anti-LGBTQ. And the thing is about, even with LGBTQ, even if a Muslim were to say that it were morally wrong, they have very little evidence within the Quran itself to prove that, mainly just a retelling of Sodom and Gomorrah, which is from a different perspective than the story that I heard as a Christian. But even on top of that, what do you do about LGBTQ, even if it is forbidden? And the answer is, as long as it's not publicly displayed in the street, you mind your own business. That is Islam's perspective on that. And privacy is above everything within Islam. You should be able to have autonomy over not just your own body, but how you choose to live in your home with your family, as long as it's not affecting the outside world in a negative way. And what I mean is like child molestation, right? Like you can't have sex with a child, that's not okay. But anything that you want to do in your home with consenting adults is fine. Medical procedures that you want to have is fine, which is why actually Afghanistan, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the other 54 majority Muslim countries in the world all have legal abortion, because it's about privacy. And even within that, within those laws, the woman doesn't even have to have her husband's permission, which is another stereotype about Muslims. It is strictly between her and her doctor, and it's not even a doctor's permission. So yes, there are more limits in some countries than others, but not to the 55%. And the survey results that were there is not how the rest of the Muslims in the world feel. And then lastly is the advocacy. We are taught as Muslims that any injustice that's going on in the world, we have a responsibility to personally, with our hands, change it. And if we can't change it with our hands, we are supposed to change it with our voice. And if we can't change it with our voice, we have to hate it in our heart, which is the weakest of religion and should cause you to then change it with your hands. It's a complete cycle.
I just learned something today. That I love that. That's fantastic. Is there anybody else who would like to answer the question of how does your faith translate into activism / advocacy on the issue of reproductive justice? Real quick before, okay, good. I see you, Rabbi Langovitz.
Yeah, so the Jewish community, like the Satanic Temple, has a number of sort of legal suits going on right now, because it's a freedom of religion issue for us as well. So there have been a few things that NCJW, which I know in your bio, Shannon, you've worked with before. So the National Council of Jewish Women is doing a lot around that. There are even, I think there's an individual synagogue in Florida that's suing the state of Florida. So we're seeing those things work their way through the judicial system. And I think, Shalise, like you shared, I have a hope, but also maybe some skepticism if the law will be applied for us around religious freedom in the same way, but we will see. And in the meantime, I think a lot of, fingers crossed, I think a lot of the Jewish community, we all have our own texts about the pursuit of justice, all throughout the Torah and throughout Jewish tradition. So people see this very much as another of those issues. For me, it feels like, there's, in Judaism, we use the term a mitzvah, you've probably heard, or mitzvah, and it comes from the root for commandedness, but I like the translation of sacred obligation. And one of the mitzvot that we learn is you shall not stand idly by your neighbor's blood. And I think this is a place where that applies, because all of us know people who have had abortions. Many of us perhaps ourselves have had abortions, and we know that it's not just a small thing, right? This is people's lives, whether physically at stake or personally at stake. So there's been a lot of work in the Jewish community to work with other religious communities to raise money for various abortion funds across the country, to do what we can. That's sort of the best. And I think something that continuously inspires me from Jewish tradition around doing this kind of work and other justice-based work is there's a quote from rabbinic teaching that says, "It's not upon you to finish the work, but neither are you free to desist from it." And I think when things become overwhelming, as they do around this and many other topics, it can be easy for us to say, it's just too much. I can't do it all. And that piece of Jewish teaching for me is a reminder of, you're probably not going to be able to do it all, but you can't not try. And I think that's a big driving force for me and for a lot of other folks in the Jewish community.
And I think that that's great advice for everybody, because right now it just feels like we're in the worst timeline ever, right? And everything keeps coming at us all at once. And so, but if you can do the next thing, the most important thing in front of you, I think that's really great advice. Senator Stahl Hamilton, go ahead.
Yeah, Presbyterian Church in Arizona has a long history of just looking at human rights and putting their beliefs into action, especially down here in Southern Arizona with the sanctuary movement. No human is illegal, right? We've got those signs down here everywhere. And I know in the state of New Mexico, the Presbyterian Church is big in in helping accompany women through their abortion care, in that they're part of an organization that helps to fly people into New Mexico, where abortion is illegal in other states. And there is at least one church in particular where women come in and receive their treatment and then their care, and then they go to a Presbyterian church to get a meal and to rest until it's time, you know. So I like this idea of accompaniment. And I had an opportunity to be a part of a US delegation to go down to Mexico to look at and be a part of this conversation in regards to reproductive healthcare and reproductive rights. And it really sparked in me just resonated in that we have been helping people for a long time and standing against what might seem like state law, right? The church has provided sanctuary, and those have been safe spaces in opposition to laws. And I think, as Arizona finally figures out where we're going to land on this issue and just how draconian the measures may be, I can see our church using the networks and the organization they have in place to just take a lateral step sideways. The care is there, the concern is there. I don't get to church as often as I used to, but when I show up, people ask a lot of questions. And so sometimes I feel like it'd be nice just to go to church to be quiet and sit and feel inspired. But, I have to answer for what it is that the legislature is doing. And I can tell you, Presbyterians are used to going to work, to putting themselves to work and creating problem solving and creating solutions. And I will just real quickly, I know we're running out of time and Bishop Anthony wants to speak, but I will just quickly say that the state legislature and all of the barriers since 2009, it seems like every year there's more and more restrictions that get put into, bills get dropped and run, and more restrictions get put into place each year. And one of those that we battled so hard against in 2021 was the fake pregnancy crisis centers. And really, it's a space that, if I can just use an inflammatory word, it's a space that almost feels like it's meant for indoctrination. And I really try to want to keep things neutral, but tell the truth. But these are not, they're not meant to help step a person through their decision making and land at a space that will be best for that person. It is, again, it comes with ideology and with a desired outcome. And so why the state has put more funding into that than they have kids care or dental care for pregnant women, things that would actually be helpful, and generative of life, but putting money into organizations, again, that are driven by religious ideology, to me, I find reprehensible. And it is hard when you put it all out there and you shine a light on it, and then you see the board and those votes go up, right? And that you don't in that moment have the power in the way of votes to stop it. We have the voice, and we raise our voices and we shine a light on it as best we can. But for me, it's disheartening. I think it's reprehensible what's going on, and I don't think those centers are meant to accompany people for them to have their desired outcomes. And so, yeah, I agree with you on that. It's not something that should be happening in our state, but it is.
Yeah, I agree with you. All right, we're gonna close it out then with Bishop Holt. The same question to you. How does your faith translate into activism / advocacy on the issue of reproductive justice?
So for me, I love quotes as well. And one of the quotes I have on my email tagline, as well as one I live by, is by Edmund Burke. So the only thing needed for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. And I figured that if we are going to be the voices of reason, if we're going to be the ones that stand in the line and fight for the rights of those who have no voice, as well as those who are screaming, please let me have my life. We have to be willing to take it to the street. We have to be willing to take it to the firing line. We have to be willing to say we are good men who are going to do something. And that something is not laid down to those who try to run over us and make us think that they're right and we're wrong. Life is about choices. Choices is about doing something. As me, far as my belief system, I'm going to continue to do something. I was the only man on this call, and I'm honored to be in a room of such great, strong women who understand that it is a fight that we must continue. So thank you for allowing me to be the only male in the room, but I stand with you.
Well, and we're glad to see it, that's for sure. And I will say that I was really inspired at the couple of women's marches, or, you know, the reproductive marches that I attended at the Capitol over the last few months. I was really inspired to see such a large number of men who were there and supporting, and, you know, because this affects us all. And so I just appreciate each and every one of you tonight for showing up. And it is nice to have that perspective of a man, because oftentimes this is a fight that's been fought traditionally by women. So it's really great to have such a wonderfully diverse group of people. Y'all actually kind of make me want to go to church, which is not something that I say very frequently. But perhaps if growing up, my church, the churches in my little teeny tiny town in the Midwest were more like this, and they had leaders like you all, then I would have showed up. But I appreciate you. I appreciate your perspective, and certainly Secular AZ, we do too. And we are, again, a 501c3 organization. So I'll make my little ask here. If you are interested in this kind of programming, it does take the generosity of our members. And if you're interested in volunteering, we would love to hear from you as well. We do have some excellent programming coming up. Tomorrow, we are going to be speaking with Catherine Joyce. Thank you, Lindsay, for putting it up on the screen. She has done some deep dive studies about Christo-fascism, specifically when it comes to the rights of people in the LGBTQ community. I cannot wait for that discussion. She's an author. She writes articles. She's amazing. And then next week, on the 27th, we are going to have the Paradise. We've been doing a series of school board candidate forums, because that is actually where we're seeing this kind of political ideology play out at our most local level of democracy, the heart of our democracy, our school boards. And then we are going to be speaking with folks in the Kyrene district. And then, of course, all of our liaison groups who have wonderful programming. Oh, this is a great one. Lindsay just secured this. Friday, August 12th, Hamat Mehta, who is the author, or not the author, but the owner of The Friendly Atheist. He puts together some really incredible videos of hate preachers, and these preachers who proselytize and politicize things and actually advocate for the election of folks who are working to undermine all the things that we talked about here tonight. So again, thank you so much to the participants tonight, to the panelists. This was a really great discussion. I'm sure that most of us are probably going to get back to the January 6th hearing. I know I am, because I hate myself or something, I'm not sure. But either way, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for supporting our organization. And I hope everybody has a wonderful night and a wonderful weekend. Take care.
Thank you.